The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom creaked open, and a hushed silence fell over the room. Every eye turned toward the man walking in, tall, composed, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. His polished shoes tapped against the marble floor, a rhythmic echo cutting through the tension. To the jury, to the spectators, to the judge seated high above, he looked like just another defendant. Another black man standing trial. Another case they'd already decided in their minds. Across the room, two uniformed officers sat with unwavering confidence, their badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. One smirked. The other leaned back, arms crossed, as if this was just another easy win. The judge barely glanced at the man as he took his seat. They thought they knew how this would end. They always did. But what they didn't know, what no one in that courtroom expected, was that today, justice wasn't going to play by their rules. And when the truth finally came out, no one would be laughing. His name was Marcus Bennett, a man who had spent years upholding the law, believing in the justice system, and defending the very principles this courtroom was supposed to stand for. A U.S. attorney. A man who had built his entire career on truth and integrity. But today, none of that mattered. 3 months ago, Marcus was driving home after a long day, exhausted but content. He had done everything right in life, worked hard, earned his success, and believed in fairness. Until the flashing red and blue lights appeared in his rearview mirror. A simple traffic stop. That's what it was supposed to be. But the moment the officers approached his car, hands already hovering over their holsters, Marcus felt it. That unspoken weight, that quiet, suffocating truth. He had seen this before, on the news, in reports, in the stories of people who never got to tell their side, and now he was living it. "License and registration!" one of the officers barked. Marcus moved carefully, keeping his hands visible, every motion slow and deliberate. He had done nothing wrong, but experience had taught him that didn't matter. Before he could even reach for his documents, the door was yanked open. "Step out of the car!" Confusion turned to disbelief. Then disbelief turned to anger. This wasn't procedure. This wasn't justice. And yet, he complied. Because resisting, even questioning, could turn into something much worse. They shoved him against the hood, cuffed him without explanation, and threw him into the back of the squad car. He hadn't been read his rights. No charges were explained, because they had already made up their minds. And now, months later, he sat in this courtroom, watching as these same officers twisted the story, painting him as a threat, as someone who needed to be subdued. The judge barely looked at him. The jury shifted uncomfortably. The verdict seemed inevitable. But Marcus wasn't here to beg for justice. He was here to demand it. The officers stood before the judge, their uniforms crisp, their voices steady, confident, unshaken. "Your Honor, the defendant was uncooperative. We had reason to believe the vehicle was stolen." Marcus sat motionless, his fingers resting lightly on the table. He had expected this. The same well-rehearsed story, the same blind faith the system placed in a badge over the truth. "He resisted arrest," one officer added, shaking his head. Lies. Marcus clenched his jaw. He wanted to speak, to object, to call out their deception, but he knew better. The courtroom wasn't built for men like him to interrupt. The judge barely looked in his direction, nodding along as the officers spoke. The jury sat stiffly, watching, waiting. The case had already been decided in their minds. A black man's word against two white officers. It was a script as old as time. Marcus inhaled slowly. They thought they had won. They thought he was just another case file, another statistic. But they didn't know who he was. Not yet. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on him, the countless others who had stood where he stood and never had a chance to speak. But he wasn't them. He wouldn't be silenced. A slow smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Your Honor," Marcus finally said, standing up. His voice was calm, measured, but beneath it a storm was brewing. Before we continue, I think it's time I properly introduce myself. And in that moment, everything changed. The judge barely lifted his gaze. The officers smirked, arms crossed, certain of the outcome. Then Marcus spoke. "Your Honor, before we proceed, I'd like to introduce myself properly." The room fell silent. "My name is Marcus Bennett. I am a United States attorney." The judge's pen slipped from his fingers. A juror gasped. The officers stiffened, their confidence draining in an instant. Shock, realization, fear. The very man they had humiliated, handcuffed, and treated like a criminal wasn't just innocent. He was one of the most powerful legal figures in the room. Marcus reached into his briefcase, pulling out a file with deliberate precision. "Here's my vehicle registration. Here's the footage from my dash cam. Here's the record of my wrongful detention." He placed them on the judge's desk, one by one. "The law is meant to serve justice, not personal bias, and today, Your Honor, I expect this court to do exactly that." The courtroom was frozen. The officers' faces drained of color. The power had shifted, and Marcus was in control now. Silence gripped the courtroom. The weight of Marcus's words had settled over everyone like a storm about to break. The judge cleared his throat, shuffling through the evidence, his face growing redder with each passing second. He had made a mistake, a grave one. And now, the entire courtroom knew it. "Case dismissed. All charges dropped." But Marcus wasn't finished. "Your Honor, I also request a formal investigation into the officers involved, because what happened to me happens to others, every single day. The difference? Most don't have a law degree to defend themselves." A murmur rippled through the jury. Some nodded, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The truth was too loud to ignore now. The judge hesitated, then gave a stiff nod. "An internal review will be conducted." Marcus exhaled, his heart still pounding. This wasn't just about him. It never had been. It was about every innocent person who had been silenced, every injustice buried beneath lies and unchecked authority. As he walked out, an older black man in the crowd caught his arm. His eyes glistened. "Thank you. For all of us." Marcus nodded. The fight wasn't over. But today, justice had spoken, and its voice was louder than ever. This isn't just one man's story. It's a reality for many. How often do we judge before knowing the truth? How many voices go unheard because they don't have the power to fight back? Let's talk about it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever witnessed injustice like this? What would you have done in Marcus's place? If this story moved you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more real stories that challenge perspectives and reveal the truth. Because justice starts with awareness.